For my leading video, I chose option number 3. Today I'm going to meet with 3 other teachers from my campus and 1 community member from the area to discuss a project to address cultural diversity. I decided to extend off of my research paper where I addressed economically disadvantaged students having mentors and kind of talk about how the other teachers and community members feel that mentors affect these economically disadvantaged kids and if they've had any experience with that. Our current campus is 20% economically disadvantaged. It means we have about 300 kids that fall under this category. I'm meeting with a counselor who used to be a history teacher. I'm meeting with a math teacher and a history teacher, and then a lady from the community. We will just be discussing how we think that a mentor program could be implemented to maybe help encourage these kids, how we believe our current mentor system is failing to do the job of mentoring that we currently have in place, where we basically are just handing the kids their report cards or progress reports and not really actually mentoring the kids. And, if they've had any experience with kind of mentoring on their own. I know one of the teachers has had a kid that he mentored before and after school per se that I had in my class, and they kind of made a bond, and she learned to work from him and knew that she had someone there on campus that cared about her and was there for her to help her, and that seemed to help her a lot in both his and my class. So we're going to kind of talk about that and the benefits that brings, and if there was a way we could more formally introduce that on our campus. I also will share some of the findings from my research paper with my fellow teachers and see, if that surprises them or if they think that is pretty consistent. And I'll also be discussing any issues that they see on their own with the culture campus and diversity among our students. So I'll be meeting with Miss Tiana Candia, Mr. Ethan Mooney, Mr. Timothy Lay, and then Ms. Morgan Mooney. And we will be discussing these issues and talking about any other plans that they may have in mind that would improve campus culture. Okay, we're going to talk about a solution to a problem with cultural diversity, mainly the economically disadvantaged students. So first, if you'll introduce yourselves.
Hi, I'm Ethan. I'm a history teacher.
I'm Morgan. I'm a nurse, a member of the community.
I'm Tiana. I'm a school counselor.
My name is Timothy Lay. I'm a math teacher.
Okay, thank you. I did my research project at our campus with the kids there, and 20% of them are economically disadvantaged. So that means about 300 of our kids are. And, we can't see that when we look at our Skyward, but they are the kids with free or reduced lunches. So you can kind of tell, and you kind of know in your classes which ones are and which ones aren't. And I kind of compared the ones that are involved in school activities to the ones who are not. So the ones that kind of have the extra support at school to the ones that don't. And you two are UIL leaders, so you can maybe tell the difference in some of your kids that you have, that you see extra and mentors a little more in class than the ones that you don't see extra. But I thought we'd begin to talk about our mentor program that we currently have in place. How do you feel about that?
The mentor program was designed with best intentions, and over the years it has slowly been implemented very poorly. It was designed so that you would have the same students, see them several times a year, from their freshman all the way to their senior year. But as our teacher retention rate changes, the students always needed to get a new teacher if the teacher moves. And now it's gotten to the point where we essentially get new students for the mentor program every single year, and so we don't learn any of them, and we see them about any of their names. We see them about 6 times a year.
6 times a year, 10 minutes time.
Yeah, 10 minutes at a time. So it's kind of hard. You hand them out the report cards, and I think some people will highlight failing grades and talk to them, or maybe hit the freshman in particular if their grades aren't doing so hot.
I think in theory it's a good idea, but there's been, like Ethan was saying, a lack of consistency, so it's really not as effective as it could be. And I know that that's something that was brought up that they're aware of and trying to fix, but I think there's so many factors pinning into it with teacher turnover and scheduling changes. I know scheduling is always a mess, and so sometimes I think that we need to figure out what to do in order to make that mentor program work, because in theory a lot of those kids could benefit from a mentor, especially those economically disadvantaged kids, because they need support at school, and so somehow we need to try and figure out how to fix that. And it kind of goes across the board, like from teachers to admin to the counselors. It's kind of a problem across the board that we all kind of need to figure out.
Have y'all ever heard a kid saying that they liked our mentor program?
No, they pretty much complain about it.
I don't think they care too much. You just come in, sit down, here's your report card.
Give them 10 minutes to
See you
out of
later.
class.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Well, the kids in my mentor class, I don't hear them complain about it because they don't know you. But the kids in the other class, the one right afterwards, and they say, why do we have to go to this? It's stupid. My math test had to be 3 minutes shorter because they cut everything out. Stuff like that.
That makes a difference.
And you really don't get to develop a relationship with the parents either, because the kids all of 10 minutes. So I think that's another problem, is that you can't really, you can call the parents and call home, but it doesn't really help if it's Ethan 9 weeks and then it's me another, and then it kind of defeats the purpose of having a mentor.
And you also can't answer any of their questions about their grades because you don't have them.
And just put them in touch with a teacher who theoretically already called them about it.
Mm-hmm.
Do y'all have any ideas for a better mentor program?
I think the first couple years it wasn't near as problematic because they were I had the same students for 2 years in a row, and I was starting to get to know them a little better. But then they just started changing it every single year because and I asked why, and they said because we have so many new teachers, it was a problem. So it was easier just to get them in there. And then have you noticed in the Skyward they still have the old mentors in there? Like some of them that haven't worked there for 3 years, like mentor teacher and so and so. They don't work here anymore.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I feel is for.
Yeah.
I get it now.
But as a community member and a mother, what would you want out of the mentor program for your child?
I feel like it would be really helpful if they could meet with the mentor teacher, obviously for a longer period of time. Maybe if they could carve out once every so often, more than just for report cards, or maybe a meeting every once in a while so that the parents can get to know the mentor and get a feel for who the mentor is and get a personal relationship with them, so that they had someone that they could go to for problems, because the counselors are probably very busy and don't have time to see everyone, and this could be like a second to a counselor, like a person they could go to.
And that's a good idea. I think somebody did bring something like that up, where you, instead of just having one night that's kind of like a meet the teacher night, where the problem is a lot of our students' parents work a lot, especially those who are hourly, or a lot of our lower income kids. Those are the parents that I don't see because they can't come in. And so I can't remember who it was. Somebody proposed, like, well, what if we have, every 9 9 weeks or something, just a day when parents can come in and talk to us. So it's kind of like an open door thing where if they couldn't make it last time, maybe they can make it this time. So it's not just that one day.
I mean, that sounds nice, but is that really enough? We don't need a mentorship program to have that, right?
Well, you need someone consistent that knows that particular student. So a mentor program ideally would put that in place because it's one consistent person as opposed to a whole bunch of teachers who maybe don't know the student as well.
The couple times I've seen the mentor program work, it wasn't necessarily that I was helping a student out with their problem because they didn't feel comfortable coming to me, but it would be I would call a parent, about the student's grades, and they would mention something about a teacher or a class that they couldn't get in, and I could facilitate them talking to a counselor or somebody, which is something you would think is should be on everyone's list that they would do that themselves, but it did help. They had no idea who their student's counselor or AP or teacher was, and so I was able to just CC them and say, all right, here's their information, and in 5 years I've solved a couple problems that way, but that's pretty much it.
I mean, what we're discussing now, what we're talking about right now, sounds more like a homeroom teacher than a mentor.
Yeah.
Right? I'm not saying. I mean, the homeroom teacher system is fine too. It's not really the same as what we would think, or at least what I would think of when you say mentor.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Well, since you can't hire anyone else, I think the homeroom, it could be sort of synonymous, homeroom / mentor. Like it has to serve the same purpose because you don't have extra people to hire. So, I mean, it is kind of a homeroom in a way because that's where you get your report cards and stuff like that.
So when I did my research paper, mentors that I referred to were people like coaches or UIL directors, club sponsors, and band directors, theater teachers, stuff like that, where kids actually spend more time with them and probably see them every day. So that our mentor system now kind of is all of our students, but I focused on those economically disadvantaged kids and compared like their test scores, their absences, like their semester averages, and then I even looked at the kids that were like an AVID to see if that helped. And you helped with AVID last year, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, how do you think the AVID program affects like kids in general, not just economically disadvantaged, but as a whole? Or are most of the kids in there economically disadvantaged?
That's one of the criteria that they look at, like single parent homes. If they are the first in their family to go to college, things like that, what their parents do for a living. In working with the students and in talking to them, I know that they feel a great deal of support being in the AVID program. And I think a lot of it does have to do with the teacher because she provides a lot of support for those kids and they know that they can go to her for anything. And because they have somebody to advocate for them, I think that's why some of them may not have been as successful academically as they are now because they have somebody to kind of guide them and advocate for them, help them. And in a lot of cases, it's not just academically, it's like emotionally. And I think that it's been beneficial for those kids, at least from what they've told me.
The kids that were in AVID that I chose from our research, they did have increased attendance that were in AVID, and their averages increased like over the years. So it did show there. I don't have my data from this past year, but the last 2 years it showed improvement. Okay, so the majority of the kids that I studied were in AVID. A third of them were involved in a sport of some sort. A third of them were involved in a club or band or theater, and then a third were not involved in anything. And then I compared those three groups kind of as a whole and then looked at each student individually. For the most part, the ones that showed a difference once involved with the
activity were athletics, just because they are with the coaches, I think, more, and they are more on top of them about their attendance. And of course, you can't learn if you're not in the classroom. So they showed the biggest improvement. And then with band and theater and UIL, they did as well. And then, of course, the kids who weren't involved, not all of them were bad. Some did show improvement, but for the most part, they were a little bit lower than the other kids. But why do you think, maybe since y'all are involved with UIL, that maybe that doesn't affect the kids as much? Which I know a lot of the kids that are in UIL don't really have an academic problem. So maybe not the ones that you directly deal with.
I think with UIL academics, most of the kids that are there just to kind of have fun, and it's just an additional test they're doing, and it's like, okay, well, if I do well on the test, great. If I don't, not a big deal. In addition to that, we only have 4 or 5 meets a year. So if you compare that to a baseball team who's having a game every 2 weeks, I think they just don't have as much skin in the game. So there's, and sometimes their coaches may only see them, once a month or so if they don't come by to practice. So I think it's just a different animal there as far as UIL academics is concerned. Something that I've noticed with students that are participating in extracurriculars, and maybe this isn't exactly with your research from the AVID specific students, but I feel like the ones that are athletic to one sport have a huge improvement for that season. And so for basketball, they'll do great, and the season's over, and we have problems back again. Whereas students that are in band or theater, or which maybe stereotypically have students that have less academic problems, but year-round events tend to be a little more steady with that. So maybe there's not as much improvement, but they're more steady. Whereas as the ones that are in one athletic event will, they want to do well that season, and then it's not as big of a deal.
So
have
like
y'all noticed that?
Oh yeah, I agree with that completely. It's very different. The students that compete in UIL, I think they're very much self-motivated. Because we don't have a class for it. We don't have, whereas in sports you have a class generally. They show up because they want to show up, and they're willing to take a test. Whereas other students, they have practices, and like Eva was saying, they have games. And so I think it's kind of a different monster. Those kids are generally more self-motivated. And so if it's kind of, sometimes there are kids who have potential, but you really have to try and encourage them and pull them out of like their timidness or their self-doubt. So, for instance, I had a student who was not in UIL in past years, but I know that he comes from a single parent household. Not exactly sure what their level of income is, but I recruited him to UIL because he was very smart, but he doubted himself quite a bit. And I think that just being involved in that helped him, because throughout the year I saw him in the classroom, and academically I saw him kind of grow in his self-confidence, and I think he scored like 4s on both AP tests he took, at least the 2 that I saw. And so it was a dramatic shift from the beginning of the year to the end, where he kind of started to feel okay in his own. And I don't know how much that's attributed to, him being pushed, but it was something.
That's like kind of exactly what I was looking for my research, to see, like you being their mentor, like them improving from it, and kind of like what you were saying, like if their coaches are only there for a semester, then they don't have that consistent mentor or support system basically the whole year at school. So a lot of those kids don't have any at home, especially, they're both working and such.
Yeah, I know for me, when I was in school, being involved in sports made a huge difference. I I know my first year of high school was a really challenge and I wasn't feeling motivated. And then I was recruited to play softball. And so I ruined it.
You need to stop that.
Okay, so the majority of the kids that I studied weren't avid. A third of them were involved in a sport of some sort. A third of them were involved in a club or band or theater, and then a third were not involved in anything. And then I compared those three groups kind of as a whole, and then looked at each student individually. For the most part, the ones that showed a difference once involved with the activity were athletics, just because they are with the coaches, I think, more, and they are more on top of them about their attendance. And of course, you can't learn if you're not in the classroom. So they showed the biggest improvement. And then with band and theater and UIL, they did as well. And then, of course, the kids who weren't involved, not all of them were bad. Some did show improvement, but for the most part, they were a little bit lower than the other kids. But why do you think, maybe since y'all are involved with UIL, that maybe that doesn't affect the kids as much? Which I know a lot of the kids that are in UIL don't really have an academic problem. So maybe not the ones that you directly deal with.
I think with UIL academics, most of the kids that are there just to kind of have fun, and it's just an additional test they're doing. And it's like, okay, well, if I do well on the test, great. If I don't, not a big deal. In addition to that, we only have 4 or 5 meets a year. So if you compare that to a baseball team who's having a game every 2 weeks, I think they just don't have as much skin in the game. So there's, and sometimes their coaches may only see them, once a month or so if they don't come by to practice. So I think it's just a different animal there as far as UIL academics is concerned. Something that I've noticed with students that are participating in extracurriculars, and maybe this isn't exactly with your research from the AVID specific students, but I feel like the ones that are athletic to one sport have a huge improvement for that season. And so for basketball, they'll do great, and the season's over, and we have problems back again. Whereas students that are in band or theater, or which maybe stereotypically have students that have less academic problems, but year-round events tend to be a little more steady with that. So maybe there's not as much improvement, but they're more steady. Whereas as the ones that are in one athletic event will, they want to do well that season, and then it's not as big of a deal.
So
have
like
y'all noticed that?
Oh yeah, I agree with that completely. It's very different. The students that compete in UIL, I think they're very much self-motivated. Because we don't have a class for it. We don't have, whereas in sports you have a class generally. They show up because they want to show up and they're willing to take a test. Whereas other students, they have practices, and like Eva was saying, they have games. And so I think it's kind of a different monster. Those kids are generally more self-motivated. And so if it's kind of, sometimes there are kids who have potential, but you really have to try and encourage them and pull them out of like their timidness or their self-doubt. So, for instance, I had a student who was not in UIL in past years, but I know that he comes from a single parent household, not exactly sure what their level of income is, but I recruited him to UIL because he was very smart, but he doubted himself quite a bit. And I think that just being involved in that helped him, because throughout the year I saw him in the classroom, and academically I saw him kind of grow in his self-confidence, and I think he scored like 4s on both AP tests he took, at least the 2 that I saw. And so it was a dramatic shift from the beginning of the year to the end, where he kind of started to feel okay in his own. And I don't know how much that's attributed to him being pushed, but it was something.
That's like kind of exactly what I was looking for my research, to see, like you being their mentor, like, and them improving from it, and kind of like what you were saying, like if their coaches are only there for a semester, then they don't have that consistent mentor the whole, or support system basically the whole year at school. So a lot of those kids don't have any at home, especially, they're both working. And
So I think a lot of the improvement we found in extracurriculars stems from the UIL requirements of no pass, no play. And some of our sponsors at our school have higher rigors for that. The theater teacher, for example, I think he has a B as a requirement, and a few of the others have higher requirements than the minimum standards of just passing to be able to play. And I think that really helps out to get the kid to keep up their scores the entire time. The students that end up, okay, I can play because I have a 71, as soon as the season's over, they make a 68 and they're not passing anymore. And it's like, it's over. And so some of the sponsors, it seems to me, they're kind of caring a little more about the academics in that manner.
And I think one area at least of concern, or to some people that we see quite a bit, is that along with the no pass, no play, one of the requirements is that if they, of course, they have to be passing in order to play, but if they're in an AP class, then they can still participate with a 60, which, at least in my experience, it doesn't really hold the kids to a higher standard, and so they know that they have to do the bare minimum in order to participate. And so that's another area, problematic area, I think, that at some point somehow needs to be addressed, so that these kids can try to fulfill their full potential and not just do the minimum in order to participate in an activity. So, I mean, I don't know how a mentorship program could help encourage those students to see past just participation, and maybe that it's important for them to do their best, if they want to be college bound, or whatever they want to do after they get out of high school. So I don't know to what extent a mentorship program would help, but I think if done correctly, it might be beneficial to have somebody talk to you about these things and see that you're not passing just to play or participate. It's kind of important.
Yeah. During my research, after we kind of looked at the initial data, we took the kids who weren't involved in anything and kind of assigned them a mentor. It just happened to be their math teacher, since I'm a math teacher and I kind of know them and could ask them to help me with this. And I asked them to meet with their student. It was a math teacher that they currently had. I asked them to meet with their student like once a week and kind of get to know them, kind of talk more to them in class and kind of just get to know them and encourage them, and kind of maybe be their support system there at school, since they don't currently have one. And we are going to look at the data of that and see if that helped with anything in the previous semester and a few months into this next semester, to see, if that could help these kids who aren't currently involved for whatever reason, because a lot of kids can't be involved because they can't stay after school due to working or not having a ride, and different reasons. So we wanted to kind of see if some sort of actual mentor during school hours that could be implemented that could maybe help those kids, see if that would work. Do y'all
I mean, the easiest solution to that is have a late bus. So it might not exactly why we don't have it.
cost more
Yeah,
money?
Well, yeah, of course it costs.
They've talked about it.
Cost?
Well, they've talked about it specifically for Tuesday, Thursday tutorials after school, and it's basically the money's not there. They have enough buses for what's going on right then. So at that point, the buses are looking for the elementary school, and so they would have to physically buy more buses, so it's not just the driver's time and the gas.
They don't have enough buses. Well, that's unfortunate because I mean a lot of these things. Yes, we're having all these troubles cramming them into the school day, and they can't stay after school because of late buses. Yeah, some late buses. We can do this homeroom mentorship thing after school, and that's fine. And then more people can get involved in extracurriculars because they can stay after school now. But I don't know.
It'd be great. As a member of the community, would you be willing to pay more taxes for that?
I think that if it would help students to do better, and help graduation rates and help grades and help students just perform better in school in general, I think that's going to be a help for the community as a whole. So I think it might be worth a small tax increase depending on the amount of money. I think some people are not going to want to do that regardless because they may not have the money as it is, since they're talking about economically disadvantaged kids, even though they're the ones that it would benefit. I think they'd be hardest hit. I personally would probably support that, but I don't know how much support you would get in the community for paying more money for extra buses, and especially since these kids that need those late buses may need to leave for their job after school. I think you sort of hit a roadblock there, but it's a good idea.
As like teachers or counselor, I know you do it all day, but would you be willing to spend like more time? I know you kind of do already, but if it was required, even like, is that something that you would do like willingly to spend more time with specific students to kind of be their mentor and build a relationship with them and kind of help guide them through their school?
All teachers would be willing to do it for students that they handpick, because there's certain students that they they have a spot for them that they can make time for those students because they see that they're worthwhile, and they just hit them in their heart. But the vast majority of teachers that we tell them, you're going to stay after school an extra 30 minutes to do this program that we're not going to pay you any extra for, that would be met with a lot of resentment.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I think a lot of the students that you do that for, you have in your classroom. So as a classroom teacher, excuse me, I did stay after school a lot with different students who came to me with different problems, and I have no problem with that. Of course, I want to help them, but I think you will get backlash if you tell teachers like you have to do this and put in more hours. And as it is, I think teachers are overwhelmed with a lot of other things that they have to do, and so if you give them one more thing that they have to do and it's not voluntary, I think you will get some backlash from that. No matter, even if you would love nothing more than to help kids, I think it's overwhelming to add something else on their plate.
Okay. So we've talked about that and mentors, and I guess that is something that essentially admin will have to come up and make something up, because like y'all said, I think we already kind of do that with specific kids, but I don't think it's necessarily the ones who actually need it. But is there anything else, like as a campus, that y'all find a problem, like with the culture and diversity on campus?
I mean, your research is showing that involvement in extracurricular, specifically sports, right? If your research shows that this is clearly beneficial to academics, then the next question is, okay, how can we convince more students to be involved in sports, right? And so, I mean, late buses, I think, would help one, but other options would be what? I mean, I think we, at least at our school anyways, we pay a lot of attention to sports. I think we put a lot of emphasis on sports, and we're pretty encouraging for it. Is there anything else we could do to increase participation?
I mean, even just like different like clubs and stuff, as long as they like meet consistently, because like theater and band kids, that are all year long, like they showed an improvement as well, because they have someone there all year. They're held accountable all year long.
But it still has to be a UIL sanctioned event, right? I can't just make a club and say, okay, if you don't make a 75, you can't football. I guess I could.
You can, yeah.
Would that be beneficial, do you think, if just everybody made clubs?
The honor societies have their own rules, and you're not in, I think student council does as well.
Really?
Yeah, you make up the loud crowd that goes to the football games. We make rules for the yell leaders that they have to pass, even though it's not UIL required. So any club can make whatever rule they want.
So we should make more clubs?
Potentially, yeah, if it gets more kids interested. I think, so something I've kind of seen is a lot of those kids are like on the fringe and they're not necessarily interested in regular things. Like I've been asked so many times to sponsor like a manga club because they think I'd be interested in that, or anime, and I'm not. So I try to send them to someone else, and then they kind of come back and say, oh, please, we want to do such and such, and meet every Friday, and yeah, it'd be great to get kids involved in something, but most teachers aren't going to be interested in that particular event.
Or they're already spread thin and doing other events, so you may not have time to add an extra event. But again, that goes back to forcing teachers to do something extra. Comes back to that problem, which is a difficult one to solve. You just need, if every single teacher, like you were saying, if every single teacher had a club, or if every single teacher had something that made it so that there was a wide range of things for all types of students, especially those outcast ones, that would be ideal, but we don't live, in the ideal world. You have to be realistic. I don't know that there's a great solution. Money usually fixes things, being able to pay teachers extra to do extra clubs and help these outcast kids, but
yeah, pretty much any UIL sanctioned event has a stipend that goes along with it, so that does help the teachers' participation in it. The extra clubs, you have to go get approved, and it's a hassle for you even to get it started, and you don't have any incentive unless you're really interested in that group, like chess or something like that. Usually we can get a teacher involved in that because a lot of teachers like that, but other clubs not so much.
Yeah, there's not so much of an incentive, I think, unless you actually want to do it out of the goodness of your heart and you're interested in that, or you want to help the kids. And I think that's part of the problem. That, and the fact that with teachers coming and going every year, it's hard to find people to replace those organizations too.
Absolutely. You end up with one teacher that has 8 clubs and gets burned out in 4 or 5 years.
Is there anything? Just anything. It doesn't have to, deal with mentors or being involved in extracurricular or anything. Just anything on campus that you see as kind of a problem that to you should be addressed.
In what respect?
Anything with campus culture. We have a pretty diverse campus student body. Like, do you see?
Do we?
Yes.
Yeah,
Well,
definitely.
If we're talking about problems like culturally, I think coming into the community as an outsider myself, one of the things that I immediately noticed were the differences in like some of the racial tension that exists still. You have kids who are who support like Southern pride and the Confederate flag, and you have others who are very offended by that, and their grandparents are still very much influenced by the segregation that occurred years before. And so from an outside perspective, I still see that as a problem because I hear the things that students say to one another, which was a little bit new to me when I came in. I didn't realize how much that still existed and how much the students are still impacted by that with one another. I don't know. What?
Really? Where'd you come from?
I came from the border, which is 80% Hispanic. So it's not. I didn't come from.
I was like, yeah, that's normal. They say some nasty things to each other, but it's like, it's been going on for ages. It's been going on for years.
But this is the last school in Texas to integrate. So you have a lot of remnants from from that still, where their grandparents are still like, you're not going to date
Yeah.
a black kid. Like that.
I'm aware.
I wasn't.
That surprises me.
That's a problem.
It is a problem.
But that's why I'm saying it's one of those things that I think needs to be addressed that people don't acknowledge, because you're like, yeah, that happens everywhere. Like, that shouldn't be a norm.
Yeah, they just sweep it under the rug.
Yeah,
and
it
act
shouldn't
like
be.
It's
It shouldn't
how
be.
it was.
So then let me ask you this: what should we do to go against that, to deal with?
I'm not saying I have the solution. I'm just addressing the problem.
I'm not trying to put you down or say it's not right. Right? I'm just saying, okay, what's our next step?
Acknowledge that the problem exists
Mhm.
and talk about it. And talk about it being a problem and bring awareness to it, I think is the first step. Because if you act like it's not there, then you can't address it. And maybe bringing members of the community in and involving them as well.
So I wrote a 3 kids the second semester for saying the N word. Should I have written up more or less, or what do you think?
No, I mean,
I think if you hear inappropriate behavior, you need to let them know that that's not appropriate. So, I mean, if you
And
heard
then-
more, then
So then how far do we go with it, right? Because a lot of this type of charged stuff, racially charged stuff, becomes very subtle. And it's not, once you hear the N word, that's easy. Just, bye, right? But there are things that are a lot more subtle, things that play on just simple prejudices. And so the question is, how far do you go with that? Do you say, it would be offensive to me if I heard that, right? Should I just say, okay, no more of that? Or should we just let it slide and say, we got to keep going with class?
I think it depends. Because I've had kids say things that they don't realize is offensive,
Right.
where I correct them and they're like, well, why is that bad? And then you
Mhm.
explain. I think that's different than them saying something that is malicious, or where they knowingly say it because they know it has that connotation.
And what percentage, time-wise, are you willing to devote to this type of conversation?
more than none.
Yeah, oh yeah.
But how
Because
much?
now
20%?
none is now.
30%? Because that becomes that question right there, I think, is the key. What percentage of your class are you willing to devote to that? Whether it's 20%, 30%, 40%, that ends up being your big key, right? And so for you, what would the number be?
I don't know. I guess it's different because I'm not a numbers person, so I don't calculate like my class in numbers as to what I spend my time doing. So I think for me, it's more authentic. If an opportunity presents itself, we discuss it and we address it right then, rather than sweeping it under the rug. As an educator or a counselor, what have you, I think it's important to teach kids to become good people, not just academically smart. Otherwise, I'm sending you into the real world to fail. That's at least how I see it.
I think me personally, I would not be willing to spend, definitely not 40% of my class. Somewhere between 20 and 30% is all I'm willing to spend, which is, again, 30% is a lot, right? So when I say 20 and 30%, that is a
For
lot.
behavioral issues, you mean?
Well,
Not
this
simply
isn't
that.
even behavioral issues. This is that is disrespectful. Let me explain to you why, right?
Right.
And spending 20 to 30% of your time of class time on that's a lot, in my opinion. And I think objectively, that is a lot of your class
Definitely a lot.
period.
And you know what I think it is also, though? I think when I was in the classroom, I was teaching social studies, and so it presented itself more authentically. You know, it's going to be different in a math class than in mine, where we're talking about the 60s and the civil rights movement, and we're talking about things like that, where issues like that are actually a learning opportunity,
Mhm.
and they can present themselves more organically, whereas your situation may be a behavioral issue that you have to address. So I guess for me, when I was in the classroom, it was different. It was kind of, it tied into my lessons more authentically.
I think in my class, and maybe it's a little more upper level, I usually haven't had to sit down and talk to people about racial things. I've had to write them up and send them out, or squash something immediately. I have specifically had to address homophobic things before. They just completely think it's all right to throw those words around, like it's completely, it's like it's not similar. Racially, I haven't seen as much though. So I wonder if that's something that,
But you choose.
since I'm teaching older students, that they've learned to either keep quiet or keep it to themselves, or legitimately grown from it um, compared to the younger students.
Are your classes very diverse?
They are not as diverse as the entire school. I think our school is close to probably thirds, maybe. Yeah, and my classes are closer to 50% white and 25% black and Hispanic. Not too far off.
Is there anything else you would like to bring up? Well, thank you.
As I reflect on the discussion with my 3 coworkers and community member, I kind of realized a few things. The main one being that maybe while mentorship and this students having a support system at school is really important to me as a teacher, it may not be the most important thing to other individuals of the school or of the community. They may think that other things are more important and more essential to the student's success than that, and that's okay. And that's why it's important to have different people on committees and different people interacting with the kids each day, because what I feel is important may not be what someone else feels important, but we can still work on both of those things to help the kids in different areas. And it is nice, even though I know my coworkers, it is nice to for them to reiterate that as a teacher, we are always willing to be there for our students and help mentor them and coach them and do what we can for them to help them be successful. It's just to me, it's the economically disadvantaged kids that kind of fall through the cracks, because they're generally not the ones to come to you for help or to ask you for help, and they are the ones who need it. And our campus being 20% of those kids, it's crucial that we are able to look at these kids and pinpoint them out and kind of seek to help them ourselves. As I stated before, and as we talked about, our mentor program right now is just not what it should be. And, we talked about a lot of things that we thought could help it, but essentially we don't know everything about scheduling and everything from the administration side. So it is up to them to kind of implement a better procedure, but we can always give our ideas to help them in their planning processes. And I do hope that is something that is prepared better in the future years for all kids, not just a certain group, but all of them. I think it is very essential to that. I want to talk about what the group discussed at the end about our kind of race problem at our campus. Like was stated, I didn't, when I went to that campus, realize that there was such hostility between races still in present day either. And we are kind of very late to the race kind of school, and they are working on that continuously. But we did have problems this year with the Confederate flag and kids not wanting to take them off their trucks, or they would wear them on their belt buckles and such, and then other kids would get offended, and it was a mess. And I never really thought about that being a predominant problem on our campus, whereas the counselor in the group thought it was. And that's something that she may focus on in her upcoming years as counselor, trying to mediate that. And that's awesome, because that's not something that even though it did surprise me and it is something I noticed, it's not anything I would think about that needs help or control or needs to be looked at. So the fact that she does is something it means that there is someone that is looking out for that, and will be, if a problem arises, she would be one to notice it, and she can kind of come up with a solution, or suggest a solution to the administration. So, thinking or reflecting on our discussion topics and kind of, where do we go from here? Well, I think it's just important that we continue doing what we can outside of our obligations to help the kids. And I know I will always be on the lookout for those kids in the background who, don't say much, who maybe I suspect, whether they're economically disadvantaged or not, but for me, since my research was over that, that'll be something that sticks out to me. And, even though they can't legally tell me if they are or not in our online system, if they're a free and reduced lunch, then more than likely they are, so, because that is the definition, but, and I can look that up, and I will be sure to look, to keep an eye on those kids, and I hope, the other teachers do as well, but mainly, as different individuals, it's important that we collaborate and bring up topics like this, like our cultural diversity on our campus, because we all have different thoughts. We can all input those into a group and bring to light situations that the rest of us may not have even noticed. And that's important to have a well-rounded campus and to keep, teachers and other faculty members thinking and alert and looking for problems and looking for ways to solve them. Especially, administration does have to make the final decision, but it's important to have suggestions on how to fix the problems that you notice, and I assume it's helpful to administration to have suggestions given to them so that they're not just starting with a blank slate, like, here's a problem, fix it please, that you're going to them with a problem and also a proposed solution, or maybe a couple of solutions, or just a starting point even. And I feel like that, you get your word, your thoughts thrown in there so you feel that you are relevant and important, and the administrator is thinking, okay, this person's not just coming to me all the time with problems, they are coming to me with solutions, so that, yeah, they are looking for, what's wrong with the school, but they're also looking for it so that they can help fix it. So they're not just looking at the bad, they're looking, how can I make this campus better? And I think that, because we don't want to have a bad attitude, we want to have a good attitude, like, I want to make this place better. And I think that comes off as you being a better teacher, and it will help you in your classroom.